Before we begin, the Differently Brained team wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record, edit and stream this podcast. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and their elders, past, present and future. We extend our respect to all First Nations cultures and recognise their ongoing connection to the lands, waterways and communities.
Just a reminder that Differently Brained shares conversations about mental health and neurodivergence. Sometimes these topics can get a bit heavy, so please remember to check in with yourself before listening. And as always, please reach out for help if our chats have brought anything up for you. Now on with the show. Hello and welcome to Differently Brained, the podcast where no brain is the same. I'm Jacinta Dietrich.
And I'm Lachlan Rutherford. And guess what? We've got Michael Coles back again for a chat. Let's talk a little bit about Michael for a sec. Michael is a 49-year-old man who is autistic. He's been diagnosed 3 times, first with Pt.2 back when he was 3, then diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at 35, then re-diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder in 2017. He's been struggling with high levels of anxiety and stress his whole life. Late last year, he was hospitalised as a result of a lot of stress and changes being imposed on him due to a change in staff members and their non-acceptance of Michael's ways of working, which previously was going well with previous staff members. As a result, he needed to resign from his job and now, through the NDIS, is able to access therapies not previously available. He has also been recently diagnosed with expressive and receptive language disorder back in March as a result of this. Michael, welcome back to our program.
Thank you very much. I must have had sort of some really good listeners that actually sort of requested me back. So thank you for having me back.
The people love you. What can we say?
Okay.
Honestly, even if they didn't, we enjoyed our chat and our podcast is all about us. We're very selfish. Today, we want to chat with you a bit more about you and your family, if you're comfortable.
Yes. Now, I'm going to refer to my daughter as my daughter, if that's okay. Basically, with my family, I just want to make sure that, I'm respecting their wishes as well. So.
Absolutely. And we'll do the same. We'd never want to make anyone feel unsafe or share too much information at all. So tell us what you're comfortable sharing about your beautiful daughter.
Okay, so basically she was born in August 2017. So basically she's 6 now, turning 7.
So little.
And she's really cute as a button. We had a really difficult birth though with her. And then sort of when she went to the early learning centre at her previous school, what they sort of suggested is basically they go on the EDIS because she was struggling and stuff like that with basically her socialization skills. So that's why we sort of went through the EDIS and all that type of thing. And then we got onto the NDIS that way. And then she got diagnosed with autism May 2022, May 23, I should say. So and she's getting support with her new school with that. But it's been a journey to actually sort of get to there.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Can you tell us a bit about that journey?
Okay, so how do I sort of say it without not being that triggering? So what actually happened was basically sometimes, she acted not quite as well as the other kids and stuff like that in the centre, and she didn't cope well with big class sizes, that type of thing. So what we had was basically a sort of a meeting and stuff like that when she was going on to prep and stuff like that last year. They did suggest we actually go to another school, but we decided to stick with it because you never know at that particular stage how she was going to react and stuff like that. And what we found is basically there was 28 people in her class and there was a lot of management, backlash and stuff like that because they felt that she wasn't coping with the class or she was being discriminated because she was disturbing other members of the class, which I thought was fairly wrong and stuff like that because, she didn't cope well with the bigger class. But, basically when we got the disability diagnosis, what they did suggest is actually to go to a specific autism-related school here on the Gold Coast. And we applied to that and we didn't get in.
Oh.
Because, basically they sort of said that there was a place and stuff like that for her. And then we sort of went there and basically we got rejected because there's no sort of space for her. And then we got a key worker in to actually sort of try and find a suitable school, for example. So basically we went to another school, tried to sort of go to various schools, and they did sort of suggest that she had like extensive needs and stuff like that, which they couldn't support.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to sort of do an out of catchment and stuff like that with other schools and stuff like that, because I was wrongly assuming that my catchment school was not that great in terms of like, their support. But what we found is basically once we got into that school, we found the staff were really fantastic there. So it was a journey to sort of get there, and there was a lot of stress involved and a lot of meetings. Yeah, it was a journey to actually get there. And now she's sort of like, we got a report card last week, and she's doing a lot better than we actually thought she was going to go.
Yay.
Which is really good.
Yeah.
And the catchment school is like a local public school, yeah? That's
correct,
like
yes.
the one that's in your,
State- It's a state school, yes.
Yeah, neither of us have kids, so we're like, what's a catchment? That's the local one.
Yeah, in Queensland, there's actually catchment schools, which are basically sort of like, they're part of.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you live in a certain area, you can only go to that catchment school unless you've got specific exemptions and stuff like that. We try to apply for an exemption, but unfortunately, it's fairly strict in terms of what their criteria is.
Right.
And you mentioned when you reached out to be on the show that your daughter has a modified curriculum and an individualized learning plan. What are those?
Okay, so what we do, it's basically sort of like, they've got sort of specific aspects at school where we sort of like have meetings with, her speech therapist, occupational therapist, her psychologist and stuff like that to be able to sort of like, get the right plan. And that obviously can change if she's doing well in these areas or doing really poorly in some areas and stuff like that, to be able to sort of modify the curriculum to be able to suit my daughter.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like to be able to succeed, but in her own way,
Yeah.
so to speak. So, you do have those particular plans in mind to be able to, well, get the best out of your child, so to speak.
Yeah, and get the most out of their educational experience, I guess. There's no point making it a really awful experience where they're not going to actually learn all of the information that you're throwing at them kind of thing. It's absolutely useless if they're going to be, overstimulated and unable to take that information in. So I guess it works best for...
And we found that in the like the state school that we're at the moment, they have these sort of like, particular adjustments for children and stuff like that as standard in the school, which I felt like, like a break room where children can go sort of like, have a decompression session and all that type of thing. So it's more or less standard in that school, whereas, the previous school where my daughter was at last year, we had to really fight for it. So it's, I think there's a lot of state schools which do have those resources basically at their fingertips, which I think is really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there absolutely wasn't break rooms or any support when I was in school, which was
and they've only
some
come
time
in
ago.
like literally in the last few years.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So.
I'm so glad that you've found a space for her that is going to, support her and, make school a better experience.
And also, I think we're really lucky as well. We've got a really good support teacher that we communicate with pretty much constantly all the time.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So basically, sort of we can email her. She shares us information about what actually has happened that day. We can share information, reports from her allied health team, that type of thing, and sort of like, have that sort of open level of communication.
Amazing. So she has a support teacher who goes into class with her all the time?
Yep.
Awesome. And how does the support teacher kind of support your daughter in the classroom?
Yeah, she's basically sort of like, she looks for if she is overwhelmed and all that type of thing. So I'm not 100% overly sure about what's actually happening from day to day, but she, shares information about, stuff that's happened in the playground, and for instance, all the stuff that's happening in class and stuff like that. So we could share that with our allied health professionals.
That's so wonderful to, know that, your daughter has that person that they can go to. They have that safe space. They have that person who, when, like I know for me, sometimes I just can't translate the world. I just can't communicate. I don't understand what's going on. And so to have that person there for her to, explain things or, just hold space for her and check in with her and things like that is just so special, I think.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like it's getting a lot better now. When I was actually in school, like, they didn't even have anything of those
Yeah.
things. So, yeah, and basically sort of because, it was not as well known, that type of thing.
Yeah, and the response was often just punitive for not adhering to it.
Which I think sort of like there's better ways of actually dealing with things now rather than sort of, punishing them and stuff like that.
Definitely.
Because, sort of it's better to sort of know how to sort of do it. And there's also sort of like, different more neuroaffirming sort of therapies and stuff like that, which doesn't lead to burnout, which doesn't lead to sort of like, mental exhaustion, that type of thing. So when I was at school, sort of, I had to sort of like mask completely who I am and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I had to hold on to this grudge for, about 35, 40 years and stuff like that. So, and then when I was actually sort of demasking and stuff like that, it was, you needed to sort of like, reclaim what you've basically lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of the modified curriculum, how much scope is there for the modification? So is it assessments or is it like day-to-day learning and tasks and things like that? Like, is it a spectrum? Is there scope to have differently?
Yeah, there's they get assessed by, professionals within that school. They sort of know what to look for and all that type of thing. And they present the plan to us in this particular way with the different needs that she actually sort of knows. So they basically, observe her and stuff like that, and they try and sort of get the individualized education plan based on the reports and the needs and all that type of thing. So, they analyze the reports. They've got experience to actually sort of put together like a plan that would actually work for them based on the observations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they do a little bit of observation of the child as well. So I think it's sort of very important to sort of get the information right, and obviously they communicate that to the parents before they implement that. Main reason for that is, well, obviously sort of like the parents may need to sort of have some input in terms of what they need.
Absolutely, yeah. So parents get to sign off before it, kicks off or anything.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Good. Just, wanted to clarify that. Is that something, do you think she's 6 now, so what year does that make her in?
Year 1.
Year 1. Oh, bless. Is that something that you think, obviously if she stays at this school, they'll be able to continue, but is that something that, moves on into high school and something that is a constant support for her?
It's a constant thing. So basically it will move on wherever sort of like, journey takes her.
Yeah.
So I think sort of like each sort of public school has that sort of ability to do that. And I think it's sort of like really, really good. So
absolutely. And, I think that it helps so much. I know that, the transition from, year to year and then also from primary school to high school is such a big change for everyone, let alone for, neurodivergent kids and stuff like that, that having that kind of grounding of consistency and having the support and knowing, oh, I've got this thing kind of thing when she, does get to an age where she knows more about it. I think that consistency would have been really soothing for me in that process. I'm hoping that it is for her as well.
Yeah, well, it's a lot better now than what it was before. And I think there's a lot more support out there now than there was before. So, I mean, the NDIS has been great to be able to sort of get that support there in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of, last time we spoke to you, we talked about your experience in applying for the NDIS and how your application is intrinsically linked to your daughter's application. But was the process easier, harder for her than for you? It
was a lot easier because it was pretty much we got sort of referred to this sort of group that be able to sort of put an application in for us, and then we got referred to the LAC, who's basically brilliant. So basically she was able to sort of do what she basically needs and all that type of thing with us, and she did it in a really, really nice way to be able to sort of capture pretty much everything that she needs. So yeah, our LAC for my daughter is really, really good. So yeah, we've been quite lucky in that department.
That's amazing. Excellent. Do you think it's her age or her experience had anything to do with, making it easier, or was it just the people that you had access to? It's a bit better for kids.
It was all the people we had access to at that particular stage. So having the right people is basically critical as well.
Yeah.
So sort of to get the sort of the right support, because you basically sort of don't know what you need until you sort of explore it.
Yeah.
And then you sort of getting as much information as possible. trying to sort of nut down what she actually sort of needs is critical as well.
Yeah.
So it's basically so we can actually sort of put a plan that would actually get her needs met. So I think it's sort of no more, no less. So it's better to sort of like have that information and basically have that down, preferably in writing, so you can sort of have that sort of captured.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And yeah, I was wondering, because, I feel like there is still the assumption that, autism is just something kids have. And it feels like when I was looking for supports, there were so many things that were like early childhood, and it was really hard to find adult support organizations and people to access and things like that, which I think, must be partly just because we're older and understandings have changed and we don't know things. I don't know actually why it is, but I have wondered what it is like for families, and I'm not surprised necessarily to learn that it was easier for your daughter than for you.
Yeah, because basically it's still like, they still sort of have it's getting better now, but how do I sort of describe it? It's basically there's still more resources for kids than there is adults. It's still the case. I've only just really gotten to NDIS now and stuff like that, so they're starting to sort of break through. The attitude in the past was basically when you're 18, like they're basically sort of like, stop that autism help and stuff like that, whereas you need it more than you ever did before and stuff like that. And especially with more people being autistic, that sort of gets that help highlighted, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, school really worked for me personally as an environment because I loved the routine and the structure and, those bits and pieces. And it was when I got out into the real world and I had, uni, which was a little more self-directed and stuff like that. And then, when I got into the workplace where it's just such a different environment to even just a classroom, even though you're a bunch of people there. And it's just got so much harder with every step where, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the minute you're 18, everyone's like, all right, you do you now. And it's very much individual responsibility, when that was absolutely when things started to get significantly harder for me and when I actually needed the support.
Yeah, and I think sort of like, even sort of now there's still like, there's only recently been OTs for adults and stuff like that, neurodivergent adults, whereas previously it wasn't sort of widely available before. So I think it's sort of like, there's more sort of neuroaffirming therapists that can actually sort of like, they can break the stigmas and all that type of thing, and they can sort of like get you the support that you need as well. So
absolutely. And I think, having those from a younger age will hopefully mean that your daughter, understands herself a lot better than I guess you and I potentially did when she gets older and things like that. Are there stories or discussions and things that you guys are having now with her to kind of start to explore her autistic identity and things like that?
I have to admit, not yet. But,
she is little.
We'll
6 is little.
Sort of like, we basically when we're actually sort of ready to actually sort of do that.
Yeah.
It's a bit too early.
Yeah.
I just find, when sort of, my daughter basically will question why do I don't have any friends and all that type of thing and stuff like that, It's not because of anything you've done wrong. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So,
no, fair enough.
or sort of like, society's expectations and all that type of thing, which I think sort of society has to sort of take one hard look at themselves and basically sort of say, look, there's nothing wrong with being autistic. That's the biggest thing.
Absolutely. Like Chloe Hayden says, different, not less. There's nothing wrong with it.
Exactly. And it's sort of like, everybody deserves to be their authentic self, so to speak. It's better to be authentic self than trying to hide who you are. And that's the element of masking, which it's very damaging to people's health.
Absolutely. And, it's so damaging on so many levels because it costs so much energy. It then impacts your mental health, it impacts your body, all of that. I'd love to know, and I'm not sure if you'll have an answer for it, so absolutely no pressure. What are the best autistic representations or resources that you've come across for kiddies?
Oh, to be honest, I'm really not overly too sure about that. I think it's sort of more sort of working with her therapist to get the sort of best plan. I think they're the best ones to actually sort of do that because it's sort of like, it's very individualized for the child.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Because, if you've met one autistic person, they may have different needs from another autistic person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very highly individualized. So and having therapists that basically will pinpoint what we actually sort of need is a lot better, sort of doing it that way rather than sort of having a stock standard one.
No, absolutely fair enough. Amazing.
Well, thank you again, Michael, so much for coming on, chatting about your daughter and also yourself again. It was once again an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely my pleasure indeed. And I reckon Differently Brained is absolutely brilliant in itself. So keep going with the podcast, and I think you're doing exceptionally well.
Same to you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, any resources that we discussed in this episode will be linked in our show notes. Do you want to hang out with us in our lovely growing online community? Well, then join us in our Facebook group. We share our stories, resources, memes. It's basically just a nice and fun place to be. You can also check out our Instagram at Differently Brained Podcast, as well as mine and Jacinta's own personal accounts. All of our episodes are available to download and listen to on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you find your podcasts.
Differently Brained shares the opinions of individuals and does not consider your personal circumstances. Differently Brained exists purely for information purposes and should not be relied on as health or medical advice. Because no brain is the same, please consult your healthcare professional for your personal medical needs.